The teddy bear shouldn't have been there. Game show rules were clear about props, about distractions, about keeping the focus on the families and the answers. But 8-year-old Sofia Rodriguez clutched that small brown bear like her life depended on it, and something in her grip made Steve Harvey pause mid-joke and take a closer look. It was Tuesday afternoon at the Family Feud studios in Atlanta. The energy was electric, as it always was during tapings. The Rodriguez family from San Antonio had driven 15 hours to be there, 5 generations squeezed into a rented van, all excitement and nervous laughter. Facing them were the Morrison family from Detroit, equally energetic, equally hopeful. Steve Harvey was in his element. The perfectly tailored charcoal suit, the infectious smile, working the crowd with that signature blend of humor and warmth that had made him America's favorite game show host. The studio lights caught the gold accents of the Family Feud logo behind him, creating that warm, welcoming atmosphere that millions of viewers associated with family, fun, and the possibility of dreams coming true. But Sofia Rodriguez wasn't looking at the lights or the cameras or even at Steve Harvey. She was looking down at the teddy bear in her lap, whispering something so quietly that even the sensitive studio microphones couldn't pick it up. The Rodriguez family was a picture of multi-generational love. Grandmother Isabella, 72, who had raised 6 children and never missed a Sunday service. Father Miguel, 45, a construction worker whose hands bore the calluses of honest labor. Mother Carmen, 41, a nurse who worked double shifts to support the family. Teenage son Carlos, 16, star quarterback of his high school team. And Sofia, the baby of the family, 8 years old and smaller than most kids her age, with those wide dark eyes that seemed to hold secrets too heavy for her small frame. During family introductions, Steve had knelt down to Sofia's level, as he always did with the younger contestants. "And who's this beautiful young lady?" he had asked, his voice warm and encouraging. "I'm Sofia," she had replied softly, her voice barely audible over the studio audience's enthusiastic "Athloias." "Sofia, and how old are you, sweetheart?" "8," she had whispered, unconsciously pulling the teddy bear closer to her chest. Steve had noticed the bear then, but game show protocols meant keeping things moving. "And what's your friend's name?" he had asked, gesturing to the stuffed animal. Sofia had looked down at the bear, then back up at Steve with an intensity that caught him off guard. "His name is Diego," she had said simply. "He wanted to meet you." The audience had let out a collective awe, and Steve had smiled that warm smile that had endeared him to millions. But something in Sofia's tone, something in the way she said wanted, made him look at her just a moment longer than usual before moving on to the next family member. The game progressed normally for the first 2 rounds. The Rodriguez family had taken an early lead with some solid answers, and Steve was in his element, making jokes, creating those moments of connection that made Family Feud more than just a game show. But during the 3rd round, everything changed. The question was innocent enough. Name something you might give someone to make them feel better. Carlos, Sofia's teenage brother, had just given the number 1 answer, a hug. The family was celebrating their chance to play for the points, high-fiving and cheering with the kind of infectious joy that made great television. But while her family celebrated around her, Sofia was crying. Not the happy tears of excitement you might expect from an 8-year-old on national television. These were different. These were the quiet, heartbroken tears of someone carrying something too heavy for their small shoulders. Steve's comedian instincts kicked in first. He walked over to the family podium with that easy smile, ready to comfort what he assumed was just a case of overwhelming emotions. "Hey there, Sofia," he said gently. "You okay, sweetheart? This is pretty exciting, huh?" But when Sofia looked up at him, Steve saw something in her eyes that stopped him cold. It was grief, deep, adult grief that no 8-year-old should ever have to carry. "The lights are too bright," Sofia whispered, her voice so quiet that the microphones barely picked it up. "He doesn't like loud places." Steve glanced at his production team, then back at Sofia. "Who doesn't like loud places, baby?" Sofia held up the teddy bear, and for the first time, Steve really looked at it. The brown fur was worn in places, clearly well loved. There was a small band-aid on the bear's arm, applied with the careful precision of a child's hand. Around the bear's neck was a tiny hospital bracelet, the kind they put on patients. "Diego," Sofia said, her voice breaking. "My brother Diego, he's scared of all these people watching." The studio audience was still buzzing with energy from the previous answer, unaware of the intimate moment unfolding on stage. Steve looked closer at the hospital bracelet around the bear's neck. Even from a distance, he could see it was too small, sized for a child. Steve Harvey dropped his cards right there on the studio floor. "Stop the music," he called out to the production booth, his voice carrying across the studio with an authority that silenced everyone immediately. "Stop everything." The theme music cut out. The audience fell silent. Even the camera operators seemed to sense that something unprecedented was happening. Steve walked over to Sofia and without hesitation lifted her gently from her position at the podium, teddy bear and all, and carried her to the center of the stage. He set her down gently and knelt in front of her, his full attention focused on this 8-year-old girl who clearly had something important to share. Behind the scenes, producers were frantically whispering into their headsets. But Steve had stopped being a game show host. He was just a man, kneeling on a studio floor, looking at a child who needed to be heard. "Sofia," he said softly, his voice now stripped of all performance, all entertainment value. "Tell me about Diego." The studio was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. 300 audience members held their breath. The Morrison family, their competitors, watched with growing concern and curiosity. Even the producers in the booth had stopped barking directions into their headsets. Sofia wiped her eyes with the back of her small hand and looked up at Steve. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong in a way that surprised everyone who heard it. "Diego is my twin brother," she said, unconsciously straightening the teddy bear's tiny hospital bracelet. "But he can't be here because he's in heaven now." The audience gasped audibly. Several people in the front row brought their hands to their mouths. Steve Harvey, the man who had built a career on quick wit and perfect timing, was completely speechless. Sofia continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "He got sick when we were 6, she said. The doctors tried really hard to make him better, but the cancer was stronger. Before he went to heaven, he made me promise something." Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his pocket square, a simple piece of white fabric that he always kept perfectly folded. Without saying a word, he gently wiped the tears from Sofia's face. "What did he make you promise, sweetheart?" Steve asked, his own voice now thick with emotion. Sofia held up the teddy bear, looking directly into its button eyes. "He said that if our family ever got picked for Family Feud, I had to bring him with me. He said he wanted to meet you, Mr. Steve, because you make people happy when they're sad." The camera operators continued filming, but by now everyone in the studio understood that they were witnessing something far more important than a game show. This was an 8-year-old girl honoring a promise to her dead twin brother, carrying his memory onto national television because she couldn't bear to leave him behind. "So I put his spirit in his favorite teddy bear," Sofia continued, her small fingers stroking the worn brown fur. "And I talk to him every day. I tell him about school, and about Mama's cooking, and about how Carlos is teaching me to throw a football. But mostly, I tell him that I miss him." Steve Harvey stood up slowly and walked to the Morrison family podium. The competing family had tears in their eyes, completely forgotten about the game they had come to play. "Morrison family," Steve said, his voice carrying the weight of the moment. "Would you mind if we took a break from our regular game? This little girl has something more important than points on a board." Robert Morrison, the family patriarch, didn't hesitate for even a second. "Steve, you do whatever Sofia needs. This isn't about winning anymore. But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming." Steve Harvey walked back to Sofia and did something that no game show host in television history had ever done. He turned to his production crew and made a request that broke every protocol in the book. "I need you to bring out an extra chair," he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the silent studio. "Diego Rodriguez may not be here in body, but he's here in spirit, and he deserves a place of honor." The crew scrambled to bring out a small chair, placing it right next to the Rodriguez family podium. Steve took the teddy bear from Sofia's hands with the reverence of someone handling a sacred object and gently placed it on the chair. "Diego Rodriguez," Steve said, addressing the teddy bear directly while the entire studio watched in amazement. "Your sister Sofia kept her promise. You made it to Family Feud, buddy. And I want you to know that your family is about to play this game in your honor." The audience erupted in spontaneous applause, not the polite, prompted applause of a television taping, but the kind of raw, emotional response that comes from witnessing something genuinely sacred. But Steve wasn't finished. He walked back to Sofia, who was watching this unfold with wonder in her eyes. "Sofia," he said, "Diego wanted to meet me, but I want you to know something. I'm honored to meet him, and I'm even more honored to meet the brave little girl who loves her brother so much that she carries him with her everywhere she goes." Steve reached into his jacket pocket again, but this time he pulled out something different. His personal business card. Not a prop, not something prepared by the show. His actual card, the one he gave to people he wanted to stay in touch with. "This has my personal number on it," he said, pressing the card into Sofia's small hands. "And I want you to call me anytime you want to tell me about Diego. Because brothers and sisters who love each other that much, they deserve to have their stories heard." The cameras caught every moment as Steve did something that would become legendary. He took off his suit jacket, the same jacket he wore for every taping, the one that had become part of his television persona, and he draped it gently over the chair where Diego's teddy bear sat. "Diego," Steve said, his voice carrying to every corner of the studio, "this jacket has been with me for every Family Feud I've ever hosted. It's seen families win and lose, celebrate and cry. But today, it belongs to you, buddy. Because today, you taught us all what love really looks like." Sofia ran to the chair and hugged both the teddy bear and Steve's jacket, and in that moment, something magical happened. The studio lights seemed warmer. The audience felt more like a family than spectators, and Steve Harvey learned something about his own show that he had never fully understood before. "You know what we're going to do now?" Steve announced to the studio. "We're going to finish this game, and it's going to be beautiful. Both families are going to play together, and every point we earn is going to honor Diego's memory and Sofia's courage." The Rodriguez and Morrison families left their podiums and gathered around Sofia and Diego's chair. What followed was the most unique Family Feud episode ever recorded. Instead of competing against each other, both families worked together, calling out answers, celebrating every point as one unified team. Steve abandoned the traditional rules entirely. He made up new questions on the spot, questions designed to make Sofia smile. When she giggled at his silly faces, the entire studio erupted in applause. When she whispered something to Diego's teddy bear, 300 people leaned forward to listen. "Name something that makes you brave," Steve asked Sofia directly. "Keeping promises," she answered without hesitation. Survey says, Steve announced. Even though there was no survey, that's the number one answer in my book. By the end of that impossible episode, Sofia had answered several questions herself. Her answers weren't on any board, but they were better than any survey could capture. When Steve asked, "Name something that never goes away," Sofia had looked directly at Diego's chair and said, "Love." The final moment came when Steve knelt down next to Sofia one more time. "Sofia," he said, "Diego wanted to meet me, but I think he really wanted something else. I think he wanted to make sure you knew that even though he can't be here with you, he's still watching over you, still protecting you, still loving you." Sofia nodded, tears streaming down her face, but they were different tears now, not the tears of grief, but the tears of someone who had been reminded that love transcends even death. "And Sophia," Steve continued, "I want you to know that you're not carrying Diego alone anymore. Every person in this studio, every person watching at home, we're all carrying him with you now, because that's what family does." The episode aired 3 months later, exactly as it happened, with no editing to remove Steve's unprecedented decision to honor a dead child on live television. The response was unlike anything in game show history. The show received over 50,000 letters, emails, and social media messages from viewers sharing their own stories of loss, of promises kept, of love that transcends death. But the real impact was just beginning. Steve Harvey, who had been deeply moved by Sofia's story, worked quietly behind the scenes to establish something unprecedented. Starting with the very next taping, Family Feud began setting aside one chair at every recording, Diego's chair, dedicated to loved ones who couldn't be present but were there in spirit. Families began requesting Diego's chair for grandparents who had passed away, for soldiers who had died in service, for children who had lost their battles with illness. The chair became a symbol of remembrance, of promises kept, of love that refuses to be silenced by death. Sofia Rodriguez kept both Steve's business card and his jacket, but more importantly, she kept her promise to Diego. Every few months, she would call Steve's personal number, not to ask for anything, but to update him on her life, to tell him about Diego, to share how she was keeping her brother's memory alive. 3 years later, when Sofia graduated from elementary school as valedictorian, the first person she called wasn't her parents or her grandmother, it was Steve Harvey. "Mr. Steve," she said through tears of joy, "Diego and I did it. We graduated with honors." "I never doubted it for a second," Steve replied. Diego knew his sister was destined for greatness. The teddy bear still sits in Sofia's room, now wearing a miniature graduation cap that Steve had specially made. The hospital bracelet around its neck has faded, but the love it represents has only grown stronger. And at every Family Feud taping, Diego's chair remains, not as a reminder of sadness, but as a celebration of the kind of love that refuses to let go, the kind of promises that transcend death, and the kind of courage that can be found in an 8-year-old girl who refused to leave her brother behind. Steve Harvey often says that Sofia and Diego taught him the most important lesson of his career, that the most powerful moments in television happen not when you follow the script, but when you recognize that some stories are bigger than entertainment. Some promises are more important than games, and some love is so strong that not even death can break it. The empty chair isn't empty at all. It's filled with love, with memory, with the unbreakable bond between a brother and sister who proved that family means never having to say goodbye.